Welcome to Richer Soul, James Swanwick. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you, Rocky. Great to be here.
And I'm excited for the conversation. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, I grew up in Brisbane, Australia, but I moved to the States many years later. And I don't recall really getting any lessons about money in either primary school or high school. I certainly witnessed my father, who owned his own veterinary practice, struggle to make ends meet. And thankfully, he was able to provide for me and my two younger brothers. But I associated business life as a struggle, that it has to be tough because I could see the anguish on his face and in his mannerisms and how I experienced him. I also became very inspired by money and changing professions because my father actually chose to get out of the veterinary practice and studied law part-time for 10 years before switching to becoming a Crown prosecutor in the state of Queensland in Australia. So as much as I didn't feel like I got educated about money, or I associated it with struggle through my father's struggles, I also got inspired by seeing my father change professions and ultimately become much happier, calmer, and pleased with life.
It's amazing so was it just the money that made him happier, or was it also the work he was doing?
It was definitely the work he was doing. I think the money was a byproduct of him feeling much happier about his choice. I think that he realized pretty soon into his veterinary practice that maybe it wasn't the professional career for him. But, we have this sunken cost fallacy, don't we? Like, if you've gone to school, you've studied, you've been doing it for 20 years, for most people, the idea of switching professions, especially from being a veterinarian to being a lawyer, that could seem just too overwhelming that you wouldn't even begin it. But he did, and I got a lot of inspiration from that.
Yeah, both of those require quite a bit of education and quite a bit of time commitment. It's funny, though, because at least law worked out for him. In the United States, half the people who go to law school don't practice law. And so I think they go to law school for something only to find out it wasn't for them. And, it's not easy. I think you have to look ahead and really test out your idea before you make that kind of commitment. And today that's easier to do than ever.
Yes, I think so. I actually benefited from being inspired, watching my dad change careers, when he realized it maybe wasn't for him. I started off as a newspaper journalist. I started out as a 17-year-old copy boy on a Rupert Murdoch-owned broadsheet newspaper back in Brisbane, Australia, and I did that for 10 years, and my whole career was really set in stone. But I made the choice to resign and move over to London, England in my mid-20s to try and, have a change. And, I ultimately became a television anchor, a sports center anchor on ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut in the US. And then in many regards, that's considered like the best job on television. You get to talk about sport all day. You have a Z level of fame. You kind of, you're on camera. It's not like you're a producer or director. You're actually on camera. And you get paid handsomely well. But it was also corporate America. And I also recognized that I had a boss and I had to be in at work a certain time and leave at a certain time. And so I decided to learn how to become an entrepreneur on those days that I wasn't working at ESPN, and then made another decision. I'm going to resign from ESPN to go and be an entrepreneur. And so, I think I really mirrored my father's actions on that. I saw him as being very brave and courageous, and I'm happy that I was able to follow suit somewhat.
Was that an easy switch for you?
It was a very challenging first 18 months as an entrepreneur. Because I think I probably generated about $30,000 or $35,000 in the first 18 months of me going full time into entrepreneurship. And I had to really let go of my ego because I was very handsomely paid at ESPN. Like I said, I had a Z level of fame, and it was a very cushy job with good benefits and things like that. But, living out in Bristol, Connecticut was like social suicide. And I was a single man at the time. And, it was just, I knew if I stayed there, I was just going to be stuck. But to answer your question, yeah, the first 18 months as an entrepreneur were very challenging. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. It was a lot of first attempts, a lot of failures. And then finally, I had somewhat of a breakthrough and I learned some skills. I got myself a mentor, and the mentor really sped up my learning. And then I was able to create two multi-seven-figure businesses now, a sleep company and this stop drinking company simultaneously. And then, both of them are still going today, 10 years later, and have a profound impact in the world, which I'm very proud of.
And I think in the book you talked about going through Landmark, right? working with Ty Lopez. Was all of that stuff after you became an entrepreneur or during the switch, or when did that all come to be?
Yeah, so I left ESPN 2012, and I struggled for the remainder of 2012 and 2013. And I hired Ty Lopez, who at the time was not a particularly well-known online marketer. He now has become so because he created this very famous program called the 67 Steps about 10 years ago. And you see him on all those YouTube videos. He created one of the most famous YouTube videos of all time, which is I'm just here in my garage, just bought this brand new Lamborghini. It's fun to drive it up here in the Hollywood Hills. But you know what I like more than fast cars? Knowledge. And I bought this. I've got these 1,000 books behind me. So that was a very famous ad. It was seen like a billion times. And I hired him after 18 months of struggle. And that really sped up my learning process. I learned phone sales. I learned how to create an online program for people. I learned how to really make impact in the world through helping people. I learned marketing, how to make a YouTube ad, a Google ad, a Facebook ad. And then that really sped up the process. So it was 18 months trying to do it on my own, struggle town. Hired a mentor, not as much struggle. And ultimately, now that I'm enjoying the compound effect of that first choice to hire a mentor. So some years later, now we have these very successful businesses.
Nice. I actually went through the 67 Steps program. I think I was pretty close to when he first launched it.
Yeah, that would have been 2015, 16, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I don't remember, all this stuff muddles together. I just remember I think I was in early because he was still recording them and releasing them
he was selling the program that wasn't complete. He was selling an incomplete program and just continuously adding to it as you went along. Yeah, which in hindsight was genius. And I learned a big lesson from him, which is don't wait until you think you've got a perfect product. Create an MVP, a minimum viable product, and put it out there and then see if the market responds to it, and then polish as you go along. That's his philosophy. And that really inspires starting quickly and getting into momentum and then being able to adjust. Whereas a lot of entrepreneurs will labor for months and years trying to get the perfect product and then launch. Often, market doesn't like it, but you've just got this 2 years of sunken time cost involved.
And that happens a lot. And I think the key is release and test and see before you put the time and the effort into it. Actually, one of the best ways to build a course is to get 15 or 20 people and then build it with them and then turn that into the product for later.
Yeah, you could call it a beta group. It's like we're launching this test group, a beta group. We're going to give you special pricing because it's the first version of it. We'll if you guys are willing to give us a testimonial at a case study at the end of it, that's why the price is so cheap now, or we'll give you some price discount or some other bonuses at the end. That's how you can very quickly and very efficiently get a program up, tested, feedback, and then polished. Or abandoned, quite frankly, because sometimes maybe people don't even want to join it, or they give you feedback that it's no good or it's not valuable or people don't stick. And so maybe you just abandon that project and move on to something else. But the key here is that you do it quickly and efficiently and you pivot quickly, as opposed to just being so married to your idea for so long that it prevents launching in the first place.
And that is the key, is to constantly pivot, see how it sits and whether or not the market really wants what you have to offer. We all think we have the best thing to offer. Until the market says yes, it's not necessarily true.
I agree with you.
So how did you get to the alcohol business and the stop drinking? Like what caused that, or how did that come to be?
Well, I was a socially acceptable drinker growing up in Australia, in that I would have 2 or 3 drinks most nights of the week. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot to most, but I've come to realize it really is a lot. And, I started drinking when I was 16. And after about almost 20 years, I drank 2 or 3 drinks a night, 7 days a week, increasing amounts on weekends, increasing amounts as I got into my 30s. And I got to age 35 in the year 2010, and I looked in the mirror one day and I had fat rolls. I was puffy skinned. I was tired. I was irritable. I was envious of other people's success. I would describe my career as a 6 out of 10. I would describe my positivity as a 6 out of 10. My relationships were a 5 or a 6 out of 10. I was never rock bottom. I was never what society might deem to call an alcoholic. I didn't get a DUI. I didn't wake up in a ditch. And so I managed to just figure out how to not just quit drinking, but stay quit. And I did that. And as a result, I lost 35 pounds of unwanted body weight. My skin cleared up. I slept better. Had more clarity. That was the time where I auditioned to become a sports center anchor on ESPN. And to my bewilderment, they gave me the job. And I really credit the clarity and focus and strategy from being alcohol free to helping me get that job. And I remember a year later, I went to a bar in Austin, Texas, the Luster Pearl Bar in Rainy Street, and I ordered a Budweiser, and I went to put it to my lips to have what I thought might be a celebratory drink to celebrate 1 year alcohol free. And at the very last moment, I put it down and I thought, wow, in 1 year, I've got the job and career of my dreams. I have this amazing romantic relationship. I've lost 35 pounds. I'm sleeping well. I feel positive about my life, an 8 or 9 out of 10. I'm in momentum. Like I just feel better. Why would I drink this attractively packaged poison? So I called the bartender over, said I'm not having it, gave it back to him, tipped him, and I walked out. And I haven't so much as picked up an alcoholic drink since. And then, mid 2000s, or 2000 and teens, around 2014, 15, just as I was meeting Ty Lopez, I was going to these parties in the Hollywood Hills, open bars, people dancing on tables, debauchery. And I was the only person being alcohol free. And I was still dancing on tables and having fun. And people picked up on this and like, is it true that you don't drink? And I'm like, no, I don't drink. How do you do that? And that was when the idea hit me. I was like, maybe I should create a little online program, like 30 days, the 30-day no alcohol challenge to help kind of gray area drinkers to stop drinking. And I'll sell it for $67, just like Ty Lopez sells his 67 steps for. And so that's what I did. I created this little 30-day no alcohol challenge program. I put it up on the internet, on Facebook. And then 10 years later, it's now an organization that's named Alcohol Free Lifestyle. And we help high achievers, executives, physicians, doctors, high net worth, affluent, articulate, well-educated folks to finally quit drinking and also stay quit using neuroscience without having to go to AA, without having to do rehab, and definitely without willpower and white knuckling it.
Nice. What was like the initial feedback? And in other words, people were they shocked that you could have fun without alcohol, or like what was that?
Shocked. That's a good word for it, Rocky. They were shocked because most people associate not drinking with being dull, boring, or deprivation because society associates it that way. Because we think, oh, if someone drinks too much or if they would choose to drink, they must be an alcoholic. They must have a problem. And therefore, anyone who chooses not to drink has to lock themselves at home. They've got to be dull, boring. They can't engage. They can't be fun. They'll be a killjoy. I submit the opposite is true. And that is drinking is the pain and not drinking is the reward and the pleasure and the fun. And I can say that with conviction because I haven't drunk since 2010. So initially when I stopped drinking, I actually felt awkward. I felt judged that people, including my friends and family, might think that I had a drinking problem. And candidly, in hindsight, I probably did have a drinking problem because even though I wasn't getting drunk, it was compromising my quality of life. But I managed to get over that initial awkwardness and that stigma and increasingly start to own it and just share that I was alcohol free, not sober, not in recovery, not going to AA, not like I had a problem, but rather, I'm choosing to be alcohol free and dance on tables while drinking soda water, ice, and a piece of lime. And I'm going to have the most fun. I'm okay if you drink. I'm going to go shot for shot with you. I'll drink the soda water, you drink that Zambuca shot, and we'll have a great time. And as I increasingly embodied that type of energy, what I got back in return from society was, cool, no worries. Sounds good. That's interesting. Tell me more about that.
It's funny how that is, the way people react back and forth with that. So at some point you were inspired to write the book, Clear, the only neuroscience-based method for high achievers to quit drinking without willpower, rehab, or AA. What inspired you to write the book?
Well, I've been doing this 10 years. I've been helping high achievers for 10 years to get off alcohol and therefore reconnect in their marriage, reconnect with their children, have more clarity, focus, produce more in their business, create more impact, reverse health complications like acid reflux and high blood pressure, to finally have a good night's sleep after years of tossing and turning and only getting 5 or 6 hours or getting 7 or 8 hours of disrupted sleep. And after doing this for 10 years, it became increasingly apparent that there was a formula, there was a pattern, there was a method to get people to stop drinking. But not just quit drinking, stay quit from drinking, because I would submit most people can quit drinking. They can do a 30-day challenge, they can do a dry October or a dry January or whatever it is. But can they stay quit long term? And can they enjoy staying quit long term, as opposed to feeling like they're depriving themselves of fun and pleasure and that they're having to be sober or they need to stop? Rather, they get to choose living this lifestyle, this style of life with energy and clarity and focus. And so, I've had a podcast for many years called Alcohol Free Lifestyle. I've got a YouTube channel. I have a pretty engaged Instagram profile that's got 250,000 plus followers. And that's where I share a lot of alcohol-free tips. And I just thought, maybe it's time to put this into a book and outline the very neuroscience-based process that we walk our paying clients through, who seem to have had just tremendous outcomes as a result of this. So that's what really inspired the book.
When you first started out, you talked about being in the newspaper business. And so when I think of that business, I think of a wave that's crested. In other words, newspapers were coming to an end. When I think about alcohol free, what's going on in the marketplace right now is the number of people who are stopping drinking is actually building up quite a bit. And it seems like the news front is now kind of building you a wave that you're ready for to kind of take off in that direction. But it's funny because I just saw an article, and it was, I think, Wall Street or New York Times, one of the papers, and it was just talking about a person who they were giving up drinking, and they're like, yeah, now when we get together with my friends, we don't drink anymore. But then there was the surprising second part of it. They were microdosing on psychedelics. I'm like, wait a minute, you just shifted from one thing to another. That's not really, yes, you gave up alcohol, but you substituted another thing for it. And so, okay, you're just playing the game differently. I don't know what you've noticed as far as the shift that's going on.
Well, we certainly invite our members of our Project 90 program and experience. So just to be clear, we have a flagship 90-day stop drinking process. It's called Project 90. The University of Washington actually conducted a scientific study on it in 2023, and the results were a 98% reduction in drinking amongst those high achievers who go through that Project 90 process. And we certainly require that when folks go through that 90-day stop drinking process with us, they are alcohol-free and drug-free. Now, ironically, alcohol is a drug. So when we say alcohol and drugs, or drugs and alcohol, what we really mean is drugs including alcohol. But I digress. The whole point of getting off alcohol in the first place is to enjoy your life, is to enjoy the state that you are in. It's not to then feel cravings for something else. Because when we're craving something, when we're craving alcohol or drugs or psychedelics, all it means is that we're not comfortable being ourselves in that moment, and we want to change our state. So that's why I don't find these dry July, sober October events effective long-term, because people are going in there, depriving themselves, waiting to get to day 30 where they can release the tension and then drink again. Or in your example, Rocky, they just substitute the alcohol for something else. So what we do in our 90-day stop drinking process is not just help people stop drinking. We help people to identify what are the triggers in their life that's motivating them to crave something like drugs and alcohol in the first place. And so a lot of that is personal development. You referenced before Landmark Education. I went through Landmark Education, which was amazing. I've been to some Tony Robbins seminars. I've done therapy, had relationship coaching. All of this stuff really is a way of how do we deal with the discomfort of being by ourselves. And so if people are stopping drinking, but then turning to some other form of drugs, I would submit that they're still uncomfortable with themselves. They're still not going in and doing personal development. They're still not identifying what is triggering them to crave some substance to numb that pain.
Do you know what those underlying issues usually are? Is there something are there trends or are there commonalities?
There are patterns. I notice a lot of patterns with our Project 90 clients. Many of them are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They're high achievers. They're successful business owners or executives or physicians or lawyers or attorneys, etc., investors. They're successful in many areas of their life, but they haven't been able to knock off this one big challenge, which is alcohol. And that's another way of saying there's still some underlying trauma that's going on that's driving their behaviors. And the patterns that I see are that people have chosen a profession that they didn't want to be in the first place. Just going back all the way back to the first part of our conversation, Rocky. Their mother or father said something to them as a child and they made it mean something. And they've been living that life trying to prove someone wrong or prove someone right for their entire adult life. They realize that their entire set of choices in life have been directed by either an adult figure or a parent or by society or by culture. or by a friend network or by their experiences. And the stories and the meanings that they put to those circumstances and those interactions with people have led them to take actions that they later regret. So a lot of the patterns is, why have they made this choice in life? Why did I choose this marital partner? Why did I choose this profession? Why do I get upset at certain things, whereas other people don't get upset with them? And so they're the patterns. It's really coming back to, I've made wrong choices, and why have I made those wrong choices?
So is the key then to fix the trauma or to alleviate the trauma?
I would submit it's the biggest thing, because someone who has healed from their trauma, or let's just say is healing, because maybe we've never arrived at healing our trauma, but let's just say they identify it, they're self-aware, they're willing to go on the journey of self-discovery and personal development. What they're going to learn on that journey is going to enable them to have a breakthrough, either with their wife or their husband. Maybe they'll be more present with their children. Maybe they'll redirect their attention into something else in life. That is the journey. And that, if we can build up a very happy human or a happier human, then what happens to the cravings for alcohol? They just subside, or they are completely extinguished. Because make no mistake, we're reaching for alcohol because we want to change our state. And that uncomfortable state that we have is because of trauma. So yes, Rocky, I would submit that one of the biggest things that one can do if they're looking to stop drinking is to go and do personal development, understand where the trauma comes from, identify it, and then try to heal from that, because that will eliminate the cravings for any substance that is numbing them from the pain of that trauma.
Do you find most people are aware of this source of trauma, or is that part of what needs to occur, is just even the awareness that that's there and underneath?
Most people, I would suggest, are unconscious to it. And those who are conscious to it then still have a choice. Are they going to do something about it, or are they going to just continue on the path that they're on? And so I would propose there are two paths. One is, I'm aware of there's something going on. I don't know what it is. It's too painful. And I'm just going to stay in the status quo and keep drinking my attractively packaged poison and numb myself and kick the can down the road and just put up with or tolerate feeling like a 6, 7 out of 10, having displeasure in many areas of my life. Or I'm aware that there's some discovery here and it feels awkward, and I'm scared to embark upon the journey of self-discovery. And I know there's going to be challenges, and I know it's going to be awkward, and it might mean that my marriage breaks up, or it might mean that I have to change, or it might mean that I've got to really change. And I'm going to embark upon that journey anyway. I'm going to embark upon the hero's journey. Just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, the cyclone, the tornado comes, she doesn't want to go on the journey, she gets called to it, but she goes on anyway. And then there are obstacles, and she meets challenges along the way, and she meets allies along the way, and then there's more problems, and then finally she has a breakthrough, and then she gets back home to Kansas. That's the hero's journey. We see it in that Hollywood movie, The Dark Knight. You know, like Batman has to go on the hero's journey. He's down in the cave and the tunnel, and he has to find the power from within himself to become big enough and strong enough to get out and then go and have his own breakthrough. That's the hero's journey. And if we're unwilling to embark upon the hero's journey, then that's fine. Just keep drinking alcohol and numbing yourself and procrastinating until you are. Or trust that the safety net will appear, embark upon the journey, go upon self-discovery, and have a breakthrough. And I tell you, for those who do embark upon it, it's beautiful on the other side. It can be beautiful on the other side.
If people are unconscious to their trauma, then how do they start to become aware of it? Is there a process that you use to do that?
Yeah, there's a process that Tony Robbins uses called the Dickens process, which is very similar to what we've been talking about, the hero's journey, where he'll take people back to when they're a child and to incidents or things that happened, and then helps us to identify the meaning that we associated to those things. For example, I remember when I was a young child, I was about 7 years old, my mother made me get up in front of my rugby teammates and give a speech in front of everyone. And she gave me about 20 seconds notice. She said, "You're going to go and give a speech and thank the coach." I said, no, mummy, don't make me do it. No, because I was so nervous and terrified. She said, yes, you're going to do it. I'm like, no. And she pushed me into doing it. And I got up there and I gave the talk, and of course the kids were all sniggering and laughing at me, and I was absolutely mortified. And in that moment, I made that mean, you don't get to tell me what to do. That was awful. That was a terrible experience. You made me do that. So the rest of my life has been seen through the lens of, you don't get to tell me what to do, which is why I then ultimately choose very different professions, let's say, or I have moved overseas away from the stability of what most people my age were doing in Brisbane, Australia at that time, which was getting married and having families and getting a mortgage. I decided to go overseas and venture into the unknown because you, society, don't get to tell me what to do. And that's shown up in many other areas of my life by me doing very unique things, I think, by being a black sheep, so to speak, which is how most entrepreneurs, I would submit, identify themselves as black sheep, saying no to the status quo, saying no to the norm. So for me, it was, someone holding space for me to support me going back into childhood and identifying a key moment that felt significant for me, understanding how what I made that mean, realizing how that then influenced the choices and the behaviors that I made in all throughout adult life, and then becoming aware of that. I was then able to then change the story and change the meaning that I put to that, and all of a sudden feel like I had a breakthrough and now release stress and anxiety and blame and resentment. And that opened up new ways of being, openness and empathy and impact.
Yeah, Tony has a question that he tends to ask everyone when he's on stage and he's doing the one-on-one. And it's like, whose love do you crave more, your mother's or your father's? And that kind of tells you where the longing is. And a lot of stuff, unfortunately, goes back to parents. Sometimes there's other things. It's funny, every time I read a psychology book, it dawns on me, oh, this is a parenting book. It's the mistakes we make as parents that cause long-term trauma in our kids, and being able to do that. Now, in the title of the book, you say neuroscience-based. So what is the neuroscience behind this?
We've studied all of the most recent studies coming out of the world's top universities like Cambridge and Oxford and Stanford and Harvard, etc., that look at positive psychology. And specifically, I'm looking for things that influences human behavior. So, for example, in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is considered by most people in the world to be the gold standard of helping people stop drinking, AA has less than a 10% success rate if you actually judge success by long-term power over drinking. Let's call it a year. Now, that means that is a 90% failure rate. Now, the reason I suggest that it's so ineffective for most people is because it's very much what you don't want to do. I don't want to drink. I need to stop. I'm in recovery. I'm an alcoholic. So now we're looking into the past. We're lamenting the past. We've got shame, regret. We're sitting around a circle in a community of people, and we're just talking about all of our past trauma and pain. And that doesn't feel empowering for me. It doesn't feel empowering for the type of personality that I am. Okay. Now, the neuroscience of our stop drinking process is, what do we get to choose in life? We get to choose soda water, ice, and a piece of lime. We get to be alcohol free. In actual fact, we get to have the most fun, the most connection, the most pleasure from being consistently alcohol free. There's a lot of study of the reticular activating system in our brain, which is a bundle of nerves, and it's actually referred to as the RAS. And the RAS will fixate on anything that we are thinking about consistently. So if you are thinking about, don't drink, I need to stop, then the RAS doesn't understand. It just focuses on the alcohol. And so you end up doing that very thing that you don't want to do. For example, let's say you're skiing down a mountain. You're saying to yourself internally, don't veer towards the trees, don't fall over. And then in most cases, we'll steer towards the trees and we'll fall over. But why? Because we just told ourselves not to do that, right? That's what I would submit as negative psychology. Whereas over here, the neuroscience that we're using, which is based on a decade worth of research as to how to influence human behavior, is to invite people who are wishing to quit drinking to choose a lifestyle. I'm going to walk into the bar tonight, go straight up to the bartender and say, I'd love a soda water, ice, and a piece of lime, please. I'm going to go out to this party, dance on the tables, have the most fun, and doing it while drinking soda water and a splash of cranberry. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to consider myself a professional sleeper. I'm going to learn everything about sleep because I know that if I sleep great, I'm probably going to feel much better, and therefore I'm not going to crave alcohol, and therefore I'm not going to drink. I'm like, okay, great. So that's what I mean by neuroscience, where we're studying positive psychology. We're studying what influences behavior, and then we're bringing that neuroscience to our Stop Drinking members. They're now executing on that, and the result of that is they're now living and loving an alcohol-free lifestyle. They're not feeling deprived because they're not drinking. They're feeling so much better because they're alcohol-free.
Yeah, I've always been told, and I don't know how true it is, that when you say to the brain, do something, it doesn't understand the negative word. And so it just does the thing that you said, don't do. And It's just the way our brains are wired. So it is.
Yet that's what's going on in any and every AA meeting. That's what's going on in rehab. That's what's going on when we label ourselves as an alcoholic. That's what's going on when we say, I'm sober, I'm in recovery. I would suggest that's exactly what's going on, right? We're telling ourselves what not to do. Over this way, as an entrepreneur, we're always thinking, what is the most efficient way to get from A to B, right? Here's my target, here's my goal. What's the most efficient way I can get there? You're an entrepreneur, Rocky. I'm an entrepreneur. Most of your listeners, I would suggest, are entrepreneurs, high achievers, executives. We're looking for the most efficient way. The most efficient way is to start associating being alcohol-free with more fun, more pleasure, more impact. And then we just focus on hitting the goal instead of not trying or avoiding this consequence over here.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the things you've got in your book is a method, you called it the AMG method, of killing alcohol anxiety in 90 seconds flat, which is a pretty bold statement. So how do you do that?
I choose to live a life of appreciation instead of expectation. So what I will do in the moment, if I'm having a craving for anything, is I will come back, I will take a pause, and I will breathe in. Now, in that moment, I've just completely changed my physiology. It may seem like nothing, and it is nothing, it's 5 seconds, but already I can feel my physiology is changing. The stress and anxiety is starting to reduce. Calm is starting to come into my body. I'm feeling that calm. I'm feeling more relaxed. That gives me a pause. It gives me a little break from, I'm going to drink this alcohol, to hang on a second. I'm just going to change my state here just for a moment. Then I go into appreciation instead of expectation. Appreciation is, damn, I'm so happy about the fact that I am doing this thing with my friend right now. Wow, I'm so happy about the food I ate today. Damn, my life is good. Wow, I'm making progress in my business. I really enjoyed that conversation with my wife. Wow, my kids are growing up so fast. I'm so proud of the men and women that they're turning into. Geez, I give myself a pat on the back for the sticking in the game, even though it's been hard. And I go into that process. And in the space of 90 seconds, I'm able to quickly go from, I need a drink, I need a drink, I need a drink. I need something, please, this feels uncomfortable, to, and here's what I appreciate. Now, there have been studies that have shown more or less 35, 36, 37% reduction in cravings just from a gratitude practice. Just from literally stopping and being grateful. That is astounding. And it seems like it's hokey pokey or it's pseudoscience. Isn't. There are repeated studies that show that just a consistent gratitude practice reduces cravings by 35, 36, 37%. That's extraordinary. And then breath work, even just 5 seconds of it, is enough to change our state. And remember, when we have a craving, it's just that we're uncomfortable in the state that we are in. And we can change our state 1 million different ways within seconds.
Having been to Tony Robbins events, that's a big part of what Tony talks about, right? Change your state in that snap of a second. And I forget his exact thing, but shifting expectations to appreciation throughout of just, even if you're on a flight and it's late, hey, I get to fly somewhere instead of having to take, the wagon train and 7 days of grueling travel. I at least get to be able to do this. And so it is that big shift going forward. And I have spent a lot of time studying breath work. Navy SEALs use breath work quite a bit to get their calm state. Our breath is extremely tied to our neurological state. And we have the ability to change it, slow down heart rate, do all of those things. Like you said, within a couple of minutes. I mean, just a simple box breathing technique of 5-5-5, and there's others. I think they talk about 4-7-8, which is inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. It just resets your state. And you don't need to do much more than a minute or two of that, and you've got your whole system rewired within seconds.
It's so simple that we dismiss it. We talk on podcasts, we listen to podcasts, people talk about breath work. And I was guilty of this before I really got into it, of just rolling my eyes and go, yeah, breath work. Okay, whatever, give me something else. And then when you actually do it, and that's why I deliberately gave you the example, Rocky, of not taking more than 5 seconds to do it, because even that is enough to change our state. Of course, the way that you just described, which is breathing in for 4 and holding for 7 and breathing out for 8, is preferable to what I'm putting forward, which is but even just my version there, which can be done in 3 to 5 seconds, is still enough to change our state. And what that does is that it puts a gap between the desire or the craving and then the response. But when we don't have that gap, all we get is the reaction. And the reaction is, give me a drink. Let me drink that Attract Blue Package poison. Let me swear. Let me lose my temper. Let me do whatever. So it's just a pause. It's going from the craving, pause, and responding, as opposed to the craving and reacting.
Yeah, in that microsecond, right? And that's throughout everything in life. Between the stimulus and the response is that ability to control that moment. And it's up to us to be able to take control of that.
Yes.
And the breathing is a good, easy way to do it, to reset. The other thing you talk about in the book is health and epigenetics. How does that fit into this?
Yeah, epigenetics is really the study of our genetics and how we can change the expression of our genes. Now, to be clear, we cannot change our genetic code or our sequence. However, we can change the expression of our genes. So let me explain. If you had a family member who experienced an alcohol use disorder, and that's a fancy way of saying they had a problem with alcohol, for example, according to the alcohol foundations out there that have researched this, you do have a 50% increased risk of experiencing what is referred to as an alcohol use disorder. Okay, so there is a genetic line that is passed down. However, from what we now understand about epigenetics, which is the study of our genetics, we can actually stop that alcohol use disorder. We can prevent it being passed down to future generations by two things and two things alone: lifestyle choices and our environment. In other words, even if our father, grandfather, grandmother had an alcohol use disorder, and even if we now are drinking and we are blaming that on the genetic line, alcoholism just runs in my family. And even if we're getting a DUI or we're waking up in a ditch or we're doing something terrible from our drinking and we just don't feel like we can stop. If we were to take that person and put them in a group of growth-minded, personal development-inspired people who are working out in the gym and exercising and eating well and focusing on great sleep and looking at ways to reduce stress and anxiety and ensuring they get morning sunlight and practicing a gratitude practice, living a life of appreciation instead of expectation, we are able to change the expression of their genes. And epigenetics is kind of like the pianist with their fingers over the piano. It's like if we change the way that the fingers go, and now we change the keys, which in this case are the genes, they get to move differently. And now all of a sudden, our genetic expression is, I get to sleep well, I'm feeling better, I'm more mobile, I have more of a positive mindset. And then the behaviors and the actions that are consequences or the results of those improved thoughts and feelings are now healthier habits: sleeping well, eating well, getting around like-minded people, going into a Tony Robbins seminar, doing landmark education. If I take someone who wants to lose 35 pounds and I go and have their friends only be 6 men who have six-pack abs, and I say, just go and spend 90 days with those guys who have six-pack abs, I promise you, 9 times out of 10, that person who wants to lose all that weight will come out of that with six-pack abs because their environment has changed. They're now around those people who have got those healthy habits. And so they adjust accordingly. They now take on those habits. And the end consequence is they get six-pack abs. So with lifestyle changes, by changing our environment, we can change the expression of our genes.
And that's very true. And I don't think people realize how much they have the ability to affect their genome by the way they live, by what they eat, by all of their activities in what they do. And that's why different people, even within families, react differently to certain things. Even twins, they've got studies. It's how you've interacted with the environment changes all of that. You mentioned Project 90 earlier. Can you just tell us a little bit about what it is and how that works?
Project 90 is our flagship 90-day stop drinking process. As I referenced earlier, the University of Washington conducted a scientific study on this in 2023. It resulted in a 98% reduction in drinking. Essentially, we get together a whole bunch of high achievers. Now, the definition of a high achiever, in my view, is an entrepreneur, executive, attorney, physician, doctor, investor, realtor, articulate, well-educated person who is striving for great things, maybe has already achieved a lot of great things in many areas of their life. Might be a mother, a father, could be in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, but they just haven't been able to conquer this one thing, alcohol. They think they should be able to do it because they're successful in all these other areas of life, but this one thing they haven't been able to break the back of. And so we get together that demographic. okay, that demographic, and we put them in a like-minded community for 90 days. Now, there's a difference between a community and a like-minded community. A community could be AA, but then you go to an AA meeting and you're sitting next to a 19-year-old meth addict who's holding up a gas station. And if you're a 50-year-old entrepreneur, how can you relate to that 19-year-old meth addict? Of course, you want the best for that 19-year-old meth addict, but you're not. You can't relate. So therefore, it's not motivating. It's not inspiring. There's no accountability. And then you just go, bugger this, I'm going to return to drinking. I'll just keep on drinking. Whereas in Project 90, we bring together high achievers. We get them on group Zoom calls. We get a moderator coach. It almost becomes like a networking, connecting kind of entrepreneurial high achiever community. And then we coach them through rewiring their mindset around alcohol. We help them to knock alcohol off the altar that they have it in their life. They're bowing down to alcohol, requiring it to entertain clients, to reduce stress at the end of the day, for romance. And we show them that you can actually reduce stress, entertain clients, and create romance without it. And we do it in that like-minded community. And we bring forward the neuroscience, because a lot of our clients are educated and they have a need to learn, and they want to learn. They love learning. They understand the science. They want to know the science. So we bring the science to it. This is not surrendering to a higher power like an AA, or doing a 12-step program, or saying we're sober. No, it's all nonsense and ineffective in my view and for my personality. I attract people who are kind of more in alignment with my personality, an entrepreneur, a high achiever who wants to understand the science and logic, have a breakthrough, is coachable, is willing to have a coach identify their blind spots, who's willing to go and be self-aware, to let go of their ego and learn. And ultimately, because of that like-minded community and the neuroscience and the accountability, the result is almost everyone who goes through that achieves at least 90 consecutive days alcohol-free. And then anecdotally, I can share almost everyone we've stayed in contact with still report that they are alcohol-free many years later. We've got people who started this program 6 years ago, still alcohol-free, loving life. That's what the Project 90 process is.
Is there anything else we should have talked about but didn't get a chance to?
There's a mistaken belief amongst people that their drinking habits are no big deal. I only have one or two. I'm not an alcoholic. 1 or 2 drinks a night is fine. Well, I would just invite you to ponder that even one seemingly innocent drink per night has been shown to destroy white and gray matter in the brain and cause some level of brain degeneration. It's not obvious in the moment or even over years, but it becomes increasingly obvious over many years and decades. And also, if you're a high achiever, and let's just say that you are revenue or income motivated, if you're operating at a 6 or a 7 out of 10 because of your drinking habits, and you generate, say, $1 million in revenue in your business, imagine if you were alcohol-free for many months consistently and you're operating at an 8 or a 9 out of 10. That could mean an additional $500,000 in revenue per year, or 600,000 or $1 million. So you could actually argue that you choosing to continue to drink, even 1 or 2 drinks a night, is costing your business $500,000 a year. So it depends on the personality of who I'm talking to. And if the person who's listening right now is an entrepreneur, the real financial cost is not what you spend on alcohol. It's what you don't generate because of the effects of alcohol, which include tiredness, fatigue, lethargy, poor night's sleep, irritability, procrastination. I have had so many clients come through our Project 90 process, tired, irritable, frustrated, stuck. They stop drinking for 90 days and suddenly they make hundreds of thousands of dollars more. If they're in a business, if they're in a career, they get a promotion. They lose 20 pounds. That gives them more self-confidence. Because they're more self-confident, they make better nutritional choices. Because they make better nutritional choices, they're more present with their children who've been drifting away from them. And because they're more present, they feel better. And because they feel better, they make more money, and so forth and so forth. So I guess the one thing I would say that maybe we didn't talk about is don't be so convinced that 1 drink a day isn't compromising your life. It could be death by 1,000 cuts, which just creeps up on you. And then you hit your 50s, 60s, suddenly high blood pressure, acid reflux, high cholesterol, not present with your children, marital strain, a business that you feel stuck in, a career you feel stuck in. So I just invite you to ponder that, and invite you to ponder, what would life look like without alcohol?
Interesting questions. And I have noticed that when you have success in one part of life, it compounds to all other parts of life. And as you said, all of these things do compound over time, just like money compounds. And they compound up or they compound down. You get to choose how you want your compounding to work, little by little. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Living a life of appreciation instead of expectation. When I focus on what I have rather than what I lack, I feel good about what I have. And that in turn inspires me to attract even more and even better.
And I very much like that one. I tend to forget sometimes, but occasionally it reminds me. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Just do it and do it now. The very famous Nike slogan is just do it. But I think adding those additional 3 words are very important. Do it now, because a lot of us procrastinate. We overthink. We take days to do something that could take minutes. Parkinson's law kicks in and we give ourselves a week deadline to do something, and then we end up doing it on the 7th day of that week deadline, as opposed to saying, how about we just do it now in 10 minutes and get it done, and it's done. So just do it and do it now.
I find very few people are aware of Parkinson's law, and it does apply to time and money, very much so. You will use up all the time and money allotted. Amazing how that happens. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Surround yourself with the type of people that you aspire to become. Have fun and always be learning. ABL, always be learning. Refrain from going out with your buddies, getting drunk, doing stupid stuff, or at least limit it. I mean, even though I say that, people are probably still going to do it anyway because it's your 20s or your teens, right? And we're all going to do that stuff, and you got to learn the hard way. But if you can limit it, if you're not going to refrain from it entirely, and you increase time spent with people 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ahead of you in the area or field where you choose to be, that will call you to a higher level. That will call you to a higher standard, and that will set you apart from 99% of your peers.
It doesn't take much to set yourself apart. It really doesn't, does it?
There's only about a 2 millimeter difference between being excellent and being outstanding. And if you're excellent, you get paid very well. And if you're very good, you get paid well. And if you're good, you might even get fired or have no impact at all, right? But if you're outstanding, which only requires a little bit more effort, a little bit more focus, a little bit more strategy, a little bit more guidance, all of the rewards of life flow towards you. The people who are outstanding in this world don't necessarily work harder. Sometimes I just work smarter, but the difference is only this much. And that's what separates the outstanding from the slaughtered or the mediocre.
And that's very true. That's one of those life secrets that you don't always learn. If people would like to learn more about the programs, the books, where can they find all of this?
Alcoholfreelifestyle.com is where you'll find our organization. If you'd like to read the book or listen to the book, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/clear. If you'd like to learn specifically about Project 90, alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. And then if you're on social media, if you choose to be, you could follow me at my Instagram account, which is at James Swanwick.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Rocky, you ask great questions and you're a very enjoyable conversationalist. So thank you, sir.
Most welcome. Hey, thanks for checking out the full unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can get the full audio podcast with intro, outro, and a ton more details here on YouTube or whatever your favorite podcast player is. Don't forget, we've got hundreds of episodes for you to go back through, and you can also get episode information on the Richer Soul website as well. Don't forget to subscribe so you're automatically updated as to what's going on and every time we release a new episode. The first few episodes of the Richer Soul podcast actually lay out the entire framework that everything has built on over all of these years. So check them out as well. Thanks for listening.